Hi, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, everyone. My name is Punmiya, and I will be taking your CM1 Excel and your CM1 CT5 side of content for this course. And I would just like to get started with Excel. So, as you might be aware, that in your CM1 you have the B part of paper, wherein you have to attempt all your questions in an Excel file and provide your answers accordingly. So my job here will be to get you fairly acquainted with Excel and teach you how you can apply your CM1 principles in Excel. We will go through the course by walking through the content, and we will also keep covering exam style questions as and when needed, so that by the end of it you're very well versed with it. So without further ado, let's get started. I am using a Mac. You could be using Windows. It's recommended, I believe, that you use Windows because some sort of system supports that IFA requires works well with Windows, but it's fine. Let's start. I'll just quickly open Excel. So I'll use my Finder to do that, and in Windows you can just press the Windows button and press Excel, so that should open Excel for you. Now I'll just start with a blank workbook. I am pretty sure everyone has worked with Excel at some point in their lives so far. I believe you might have done a school project, or you may have worked on just a personal project, or just have seen it some sort of crash course on Excel. So however, I will try to work you through these things again, and I'll assume that you are completely clueless about Excel. So let's get into it. This is how a normal Excel or a spreadsheet looks like. You have all these grid lines that appear. You have all these rows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, columns A, B, C, D, and so on. And all of them make like a lot of cells that you can see. Each of the cell is also named with the row and column that it has. For example, if I look at this cell, this is in column F and row 7. So that's why it's F7 and so on. So since these cells are spread out in rows and columns, we call them a spreadsheet. Now, what can I do with these cells? So I can just simply write some text. Let's say I want to write my own name, Kevin Punmiya. Or if I want to write some numbers, some random numbers, 100, 55. If I want to write some special text characters, add, hash, etc., I can do all of that. So basically I can write in text in those cells, and it then gets stored in that cell and it displays in that cell. Yes, so now we understand how the spreadsheet is laid out. We also see a lot of these stuff on the top. So this is called a ribbon, and all these things, that is home, insert, draw, these are the different tabs, and you can do basically different types of functions with these ribbons and tabs. Now by default you will always have the home tab open, and as you can see, you might be familiar with this. These are your font related stuff that you can change, and we will work through more of this as and when we go through the course and as and when they are required. We currently have opened this file as a blank workbook, and it is titled as book 1. That is because that's a default name that Excel gives to an unknown file. If I want to save this file, I can either use this save button over here, or I can use a shortcut which is Ctrl+S or Command+S if you're using Mac. So I'll use Command+S, and where do I want to store this book? Let's say I want to write this book name as CM1 Introduction, and I can simply save this. So my name of this workbook has changed to CM1 Introduction, and that is how you simply save a workbook. So this file itself is called a workbook. Where I am currently working is in the sheet 1, which is called a worksheet. So I can simply add another worksheet by clicking on this plus button. So now I have a sheet 1 and a sheet 2, and similarly if I want to get rid of this sheet 2, all I have to do is right click over here, and there is a delete option. So I can simply delete this as well, and the data in there, or if there was any data in there, will be gone. So that's how you can add worksheets, remove worksheets, and we will deal more about worksheets and workbooks in later chapter. Yes, so we have just seen a basic of Excel. Now I want to understand what is so special about it, right? I have written text, I've written numbers, I've written special characters, and I can see them being displayed. What's so special about it? So we will start understanding more about the operations that we can do with Excel, and I will start with the basic arithmetic operations that we can do using Excel, which is add, subtract, multiply and divide. So I want to, let's say, add these two numbers 100 and 5 using Excel. I can very well use a calculator for that, but we will slowly understand why Excel is a much better option for us. So if I want to add these two numbers, anytime I want to perform a function or a calculation in Excel, I will have to start with the is equal to word. So I will have to press is equal to first, and let's say I want to add 100 and 5. So all I'll do is simply press 100, use the plus sign and 5. So if I do this and I press enter, you will see that instead of this is equal to 100 plus 5, I actually get the answer, which is 105. So what Excel does is whenever I use is equal to, it just simply understands that now there is some function to be performed, and since I do 100 plus 5, it does the calculation itself and gives me the output directly. If you want to check what formula was used, you can actually use this formula window. So as I press this cell E7, you can see in this formula window here what the original formula was. Okay, now similarly I want to subtract 45 from 200. So the way to do that is I will use is equal to. Now I can write the numbers 245 just like I did above, but another way I can actually do this subtraction is by actually selecting cell C8, which is where the number 200 is stored, and saying minus cell D8 where the number 45 is stored. So now in the formula you will see it is equal to C8 minus D8, and when I do that, let's see what the answer is. So the answer is 155, which is what you will get if you subtract 45 from 200. And what Excel does is when I say okay, you have to subtract D8 from C8, what Excel does is it goes to the cell C8, looks what number is there over there, which is 200, and subtracts 45, which is cell D8 from that, and gives you the output 155. Hope that is clear. So if I just want to do multiplication in a similar manner, now for plus minus you have your basic operators, that is your plus sign and the hyphen sign or the minus sign. For multiplication, the sign or the operator that you use is, I will select let's say 5 or C9, and I want to multiply D9 with it. So the operator that we use is the star or the asterisk key, and just find the asterisk key in your keyboard and use that. So if I do that C9 into D9, I should get 100, and I do get 100, which is simply 5 times 20. Similarly for dividing, you start with an is equal to, like always, select what your numerator is, which is C10, and since I want to divide, the operator for division is your forward slash, so 50 upon this 5, which is C10 upon D10, and I should get the answer as 10. So that's how you can work with your basic arithmetic operators in Excel. I understand this must be very basic for most of you. However, if you're working on Excel for the first time, or you've lost touch with Excel, I will strongly recommend that you actually do these small operations along with me, so that you will get more in touch with Excel and you will be more familiarized with it. Maybe you will make some very basic mistakes now that you'll realize, and which will help you further in the course. So we just saw all the 4 arithmetic operators: add, subtract, multiply, divide. So let's quickly have a look at the entire agenda of this chapter now. I just started off scratch so that you would get a good introduction to Excel. Now will be a good time to speak about your chapter 1. So we saw the Excel interface, we covered ribbons, tabs, workbooks, understanding cells, rows, and the references. We also saw how we edit data, and we are done with arithmetic operators. So next thing we would like to work with is understanding the autofill feature, which is pretty important when you work with data specifically in Excel. So I'll just start with that using an example. Let's say I was to create a list of all the students that are there in this course in Finstat, and I would want to write their names and maybe some test scores for a particular test. So the way I will do that is I'll probably have serial number, the name of the student, marks out of, that is how many marks out of that particular paper is, and marks obtained. Okay, so first thing I want to speak about before I get into autofill feature is, you see these content marks out of and marks obtained, and if you notice, then they are pretty much at the edge or at the right side of the border, or the marks obtained is actually even crossing that border, which means that this cell or this column is not wide enough for us to be able to see the entire content. So the way to actually change the width of a column is something like this. Let's say I want to change this marks out of column width. So this is column D, and the way I will do that is I can select column D, and if I move my cursor between D and E, you will see there is this crossbar cursor appearing. I use my left click of the mouse, and then you can see the width is selected. Then I can just drag to increase or decrease this width. So let's say I want this much. So that looks good. Similarly, I want to do the same thing for this marks obtained, which is column E. Now, although over here I manually adjust it so that marks out of is completely visible to me, a way that you can get Excel to do this for you is you just go between columns E and F, and you can see this crossbar, and you double click. So when I double click there, instead of dragging it myself, what Excel does is it auto adjusts that width for you, so that now marks obtained is properly inside your cell E3 and completely visible. Okay, so that is about auto adjusting. And just before I move ahead with autofill, I can tell you that you can do the same thing for row height as well. So if I wanted to increase the height of this row, again I could just go between 3 and 4 and have that same crossbar thing appear. So I can then move this height the way I want to. Okay, so let's get started with this table. Now let's see if there are, let's think there are 70 students in this class. So I want first of all the serial number, which will be 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on till 70. Now I can do that, but it will be a bit tedious and pretty boring honestly to do that. And what if there were 1000 students, and will I have to do that 1000 times by manually writing 1000 numbers? So I will not do that. Instead, what I can do is, even if I have just written 1 and 2, I deleted the other 2. So after this, if I want to just continue in this series, what I can do is I can select these 1 and 2. I can do that using my mouse, selecting it 1 and 2. And another way I can do that is using the keyboard shortcut, which is just simply pressing shift and the down arrow. So shift and down arrow, or the mouse, both the things selects both these cells, which is cell B4 and B5. And now I want a way for Excel to continue writing that series for me, that is still 70. So the way we can get that done is, if you look at the corner of this series, you will see a green dot. In Windows you might see a black dot, and if you move your cursor towards that, you will see that the color of your cursor changes. In my case, it changes from white to black. So this is how you actually use the autofill feature. When I click over here and I drag this, you can see the toggles, the numbers are toggling around my range, and since I want to select till 70, I can just go down, and I think till here. Yes, so as you can see that I only had 1 and 2, and I had Excel fill the rest up for me till 70. The way Excel does is it thinks that okay, there is 1, then there is 2, which means we are increasing by 1. So it will continue with that logic, and it will continue till the range where we want it to. In this case, that was 70. Okay, so let's say I don't want to write the names for now, but the marks out of for all the students is 100. Now again, I have to write this 100 for all the 70 students. I will not do that using writing the 100 number 70 times. Instead, I can just use this autofill feature and drag this till the position where I want it to, which is 70. So hope you understand about autofill feature, and hope you use it, because I am pretty sure it will be useful for you at some point in this course. And I will again suggest, if you're not trying with me, just maybe pause this video now and give this a try yourself, understand more about the autofill feature by doing it yourself. Okay, so once we are done with that, maybe we can go back to our agenda and maybe click the checkbox for the autofill feature. Now I want you to understand a little bit more about worksheets as well. I think I've already shown you how to add worksheets, which is just by using this plus button over here. And if I want to delete something, I can, let's say if I want to delete this sheet 1, the way I do that is I can just go over there, right click, and there is this delete option. Once I do that, it will ask for a confirmation, that is, you want to permanently delete it, and I will say yes, delete this. So that sheet is gone. Another thing is, you will see by default the sheet names are sheet 3, sheet 4 and so on. But if I have to refer back to this file someday, I will not know what is exactly in sheet 4. I know that for now I have added the test details, but in future I may not know that, and I will have to go into that sheet to actually understand what is inside. So the better way of that is if I rename this sheet to say what it does. So how do we rename this sheet? So for that, you have two options. Either you go over sheet 4 and right click, and there is this option of rename. That's one way, and the other way is you just go on this sheet 4 and double click over it. So either right click and rename or double click. In both cases you will see this sheet name is now editable, and I want to rename this from sheet 4 to, let's say, mark sheet, and I press enter. So with that, you can see that I have successfully renamed my sheet 4 to mark sheet. And in that case, if in future I want to refer back to this file, I see that okay, there is a sheet called mark sheet, it must have all the marks that I stored of this test inside it. Yes, so the next thing on the agenda is copying and moving worksheets, which I'll quickly show how it's done. So let's say I have this sheet with the numbers and the names and the marks out of return of all the students for one particular subject. Now let's say that is CM1, and I want the same list to be copied for another subject, let's say CS2. Only the marks obtained column will keep on changing based on what marks are obtained, but the rest will be same. So if I want to do that, one way I can do it is by copying this worksheet. So either I copy the content inside it or I copy the worksheet itself. So the way we can actually copy the worksheet is simply right clicking on this mark sheet, and you can see this option move or copy. When I select that, it just asks me in which book is it copying. So it is copying in the same workbook where I'm using CM1 introduction, and where does it want to copy this. So let's say I want to copy it at the very end, so I'll say move this to the very end, and since I want to create a copy of this, I'll check this box, create a copy, and I press OK. So you can see there is a mark sheet 2 over here already, which has exactly the same content as my mark sheet. So the way it will be useful for you is maybe in the exam or just in general while solving something, you will be given a data sheet and you will be asked to maybe copy that data in another worksheet and do your workings over it, or you would want to prefer to do that way, and in both the cases this is one of the easiest way to do that. Okay, so now we move ahead in our chapter towards more relevant stuff and more exciting stuff, which is formulas. So let's take a new sheet and let's call this sheet as student A. Now in this sheet I'm just simply recording the marks in all 6 core series subjects for this particular student A. So let's say I have the columns subject, marks out of, and marks obtained for this particular student. Again, I will adjust my columns C and column D, the width of those columns that is, and I'll just write the subject's name: CM1, CM2, CS1, CS2, CB1 and CB2. So these are your 6 core series subjects. Marks out of will be 100 in each case. So now I hope you understand, I will not write the number 100 6 times, rather I will use the autofill feature. Another quick shortcut in the autofill feature, I think it's a good time to teach you now. You can either click on this and drag this till the 11th row, or what you can do is simply double click on this. Now why that works is, first Excel understands that okay, you want to use your autofill feature, that is you want to copy this 100 for n number of times, and when you double click, what Excel does is it looks in the nearby region. In our case it looks from column C to column B and understands that we have data over here from B6 to B11, so it automatically fills the C6 to C11 references. If this is tricky to understand, then I'll suggest you stick to the drag approach that we were using, but these are new and finer things that I suggest you keep on learning to enhance your Excel understanding. So let's give some random marks to this student A. Let's say he got 74 in CM1, 65 CM2, CS1 maybe 80, CS2 77, CB1 was good 81, and CB2 was fine 62. These are not my marks, these are just some random numbers I came up with, but we have noted down all the marks for this particular student. Now let's say I want to understand, or rather the student A wants to understand, okay, I understand I got these many marks in these many subjects, but what is the total marks that I got and what was the total out of? If student A wants to know that, that means that he wants to add all these numbers, right? He wants to take a total of all these numbers, and we already saw in basic operators how we can add numbers. So what I can do is I can select this cell D6 which contains the marks for CM1, use the plus sign, then select D7, use the plus sign, and so on. I select all the 6 subjects. Although I will get the right answer using this is absolutely not the right approach to do that, because it will be very tedious. I may make a mistake in between, I may skip out on a number, I may use a number twice, and it will just not be a good manner to do this. So what I do is I get out of this formula. I did that by using the escape button, and I actually use an inbuilt Excel formula to get this total. So there is a formula in Excel itself which gives me total of the numbers, and that formula is called the sum formula. So the way I do that is, like every other operator, I will have to start with is equal to introduce that formula and write the words sum, S-U-M. So you can see in the small window over here that the formula sum is selected, and I want to now use this formula. So for that I will have to open the bracket. So for me it is shift plus 9. When I press that, the bracket is open. Just look at how it is in your keyboard, must be pretty similar. And now if you see, it asks me for some selection. So this number 1, number 2 is your selection, that is what do you need a sum of, and I need a sum of all the numbers from D6 to D11. So what I do is I select that range D6 to D11. So my formula looks like sum of D6 to D11 range. I will close the bracket and that completes my formula. So when I press enter, you can see the number 439 appears, which is nothing but the sum of these 6 marks obtained for the particular student A. Similarly, I want to take the sum total of the marks out of column as well, and you would already be understanding that this has to be 600, but maybe let's practice our sum formula again. So I use SUM sum. You can open the bracket just like we mentioned, or if you want to be a little quicker at Excel, what you can do is you can also use the tab button. So you press the formula, and if your formula is in number 1 of the selection range, then you can simply use the tab button, and again you select the range, close the bracket, and you get the number 600 over here. So we introduced ourselves with a formula in Excel, which is a sum formula, which took some of the inputs inside that formula. Similarly, let's say student A wants to understand what is his average. So he has scored marks, he has scored great marks in some subjects such as CB1, CS1. He has scored okayish marks in CB2 and let's say CM2. He wants to understand on an overall how did he do. So he wants to get an average. So for that, what we can do is we can use the so-called average function itself. That is, if you type AVE, you can see already this average button is, the average formula is showing in the window, and if I simply press tab, it will select the average formula and ask directly for the inputs. So I want to take the average of these 6 marks that I obtained. I will close the bracket and I will press enter, and you can see that Excel here gives me an answer of 73.16666 n number of times and then a 7. So that's your average for the marks obtained over here. However, we will do one additional thing is, let's say although we are happy with the calculation, we are not happy with how this answer is looking like. We don't want so many decimals. Student A only wants his answer up to let's say 2 decimals. So how can we do that? So in order to reduce the decimal places in this number, we have to use number formatting. That is, you have to format this number in a way that it only shows 2 decimals. And you can easily reduce the number of decimals of a number from your home tab if you look at this particular button, which is decrease decimal button. So once I click on that, you can see one by one the decimals are decreasing, and I have 73.17 as my final answer, in which I used my Excel formula average and I used the number formatting as well to actually get this number in 2 decimals. Yes, so that is how your sum and average formulas work. In Excel there are about at least thousands of formulas overall, and you need not know all of them, but you will know all the relevant ones by the end of this course. All the formulas have this similar structure wherein you have to type the formula name first, with starting with the is equal to sign, add your inputs, and finally just close the bracket to get your output. So let's learn another thing in Excel. So let's say there is a student B, and student B is actually the younger brother of student A, and student B is also appearing for actuarial subjects, but he has one goal in sight, that he wants to score at least the number of marks that his brother has scored or more. So what he did is he created a target for himself in each of the subjects. That is, he says that in CM1, CM2, being a finance student himself, he wants to score at least 10 more marks than his brother. In the stats subject, let's say he thinks that he can only score 5 more marks than his brother because he's not a core stat student and his brother already did well in that. And in the business papers, he thinks that he can do a little better, which is he will score 6 more marks in both of the business papers than his brother. So what he wants to do now is he wants to understand how much marks should he score in each of these subjects to actually be able to meet his target. So for that, what we will do is we will create a column called marks not obtained but marks desired for student B. Again, I will auto adjust the width of this particular column by double clicking. And now I want to understand how much marks student B should get to be able to achieve his target. So for that, I will use a simple sum operator, which is equal to D6 plus F6, and I will press enter. As expected, it gives me the answer for 74 plus 10, and I can very easily do this or repeat this formula for all the 6 subjects by using the autofill feature. So when I use this autofill feature, you can see that Excel is adding the columns D and column F relevant rows for each of the cell. So for H7 it adds D7 plus F7. Similarly in H8 it adds D8 plus F8 and so on, which makes it very easy to work with this kind of tabular data in Excel. Now let's say there is a student C, and student C is pretty confident of himself. Let's say he's a cousin brother of student A and he is pretty confident of himself. He says that I don't have to create a target for each of the subjects separately. My goal is clear, that is I want to score 12 more marks in each of the subject than student A. So he has a clear goal. He has to outscore student A by 12 marks in each of the 6 subjects. So again, he wants to understand what is the marks that he should actually get for that. So I will write marks desired and auto adjust. Now if I use is equal to marks obtained of student A and add this 12 over here, which is in K3, and press enter, I get my answer 86 for CM1, which is correct. Now let's see what happens when we use the autofill feature. So when I do that, you may notice that for CM2 it is simply 65, which does not sound right. If I want to outscore 65 by 12, the answer cannot be 65 itself. So what is happening here? Let's understand in the formula. So over here it was simply D6, which is 74, plus K3. In the cell below that, I see this is taking D7, which is 65, which is fine, plus K4. Now K4 is actually a blank cell. So why is Excel using that cell? Now Excel does not know that what you actually want to do unless you tell it what you want to do. What Excel does is it simply copies this formula D6 plus K3 and adds one row to both the references. So what it does is it simply does D7 plus K4 when you copy it down and keeps on doing the same. So you can see D8 plus K5, D9 plus K6 and so on. And what I actually wanted to do is I wanted these marks as it is, and I wanted to add this one particular number, that is K3, to all of them. So how can I make Excel do that is by doing something which is called as freezing a cell. So how do we actually freeze a cell? What I want to do is I want to copy this formula across, but I don't want this K3 to change. I want this to be K3 itself. So for that you can go back to your formula. So over here I am editing this formula K3, and when your cursor is around K3, what you have to do is you have to press F4. So your function key is F1, F2 and so on. So you have to press F4 over there. If you're using a Mac, you may have to use your function button and press F4, and you will see these dollar signs have appeared ahead of K and 3. So you will see $K $3 instead of K3. This has frozen K3 for me. So now if I press enter, you will see the formula is changed to D6 plus $K $3. And now if I use this autofill feature, you will see that now for CM2 it is giving me 65 plus 12, that is 77 is the answer. And the reason it is doing it is because it is still continuing in its series for D6 to D7, D8 and so on, but it has frozen itself for K3. So in each of the formula now you will only see K3 instead of K4, K5 and K6 that we were earlier seeing. So that's how you can freeze a cell and accordingly populate, or rather copy your formula across rows or even across columns and still be able to get your answer correctly. Yes, so we have already introduced ourselves to the formulas, you've seen functions, sum, average and so on, and we saw freezing cells as well. Now there is another thing such as naming cells, so let's simply look at what it is. So here I have created a simple cost sheet for ourselves, wherein we want to understand what should be the selling price for these 4 products A, B, C and D. Now even if you're not aware of costing, you must realize that the way any company will understand selling price of a product is it will calculate the cost that it takes for that particular product and add the amount of profit it wants to earn in that by selling that product and get the selling price. So over here I've already populated the fixed cost, variable cost, profit elements for these products, and if I want to calculate now simply the selling price at which these products should be sold, all I have to do is I have to use the sum function. So I hope you are aware of the sum function, we used it just a while ago. So I'll simply press SUM, use the tab button and select this range. I want to add the fixed cost, variable cost and the profit. I will close the bracket and press enter. So with this I understand that okay, this company needs to sell product A at 1700. I can simply copy this formula for the next 4 products as well. So far I've been using the autofill feature. Another intuitive way to do the same thing is you can use your copy command, that is you can either right click and press copy, or the more simpler way is to use Ctrl plus C or Command plus C in your keyboard, and you will see that the border around here is moving, which means this particular cell or this particular selection has been copied, and I want to paste this in cells E5 to E8. So what I do is I select cells E6 to E8 and I will simply paste or use Ctrl plus V, and accordingly you will see that this particular formula in cell E5 has been copied from E6 to E8, and after copying you will still see this is moving around. If I simply select somewhere else, it is still copied. To get out of that copied zone, all you have to do is press escape. So when you press escape, that copied zone is exited, and now you've seen that I have copied this particular formula for all 4 products, and accordingly I have the selling price for all these 4 products. Now what we realize is that this particular cost sheet was created by a science student, and a commerce student comes in and he tells that, dude, you forgot to add a very important element to this price, which is your GST. So we are figuring out, okay, now we need to add the GST to this price, and the way to do that is using the GST rate on this and adding that to your final price. So What that means is we want to apply how much GST we need to charge. Let's say in this particular product we have a GST rate of 18%. That is, an 18% GST needs to be charged on these selling prices for us to be able to understand the final selling price. So what I'll do is I will add a column of GST over here and have my final selling price in this column. Again, I hope you guys are actually doing this with me so that you will understand the small bits about formulas and autofill and so on as you go by. So in order to calculate this GST, how much GST will be applied on product A, all I need to do is I simply need to say is equal to this 1700, which is E5, and I will multiply this with the GST rate that I see here, that is in cell G2, and when I press enter I get the answer 306, which is nothing but 18% of 1700, which is the GST that needs to be charged on product A. Similarly, I want to do the same thing for B, C and D, so I can just use autofill or copy and paste, but you will see this error. I want you to take a minute and think why this error came in picture. You should be aware of it. So yes, we see an error over here, and if you've guessed it, congrats. It is because we were multiplying E5 to G2 without actually freezing the cell G2. We just took an example before this wherein if we do not freeze, what happens is in the very next row it will take E6 and multiply that with G3, which is blank. Even worse is happening in this cell, which is in cell F7, wherein you see E7, that is this number 1900, is being multiplied by G4, which is a text, and when you multiply number with a text, Excel will give you this value error output, that there is something wrong with the values you have selected. So we can simply undo that by pressing Ctrl plus Z and understand what we can do to make our formula better. So one thing, as I mentioned, that we could simply freeze this cell G2 in our formula over here, and we will get our answers when we copy and paste. But there is another way we can do this, which is I will simply first of all get out of this copy selection by pressing escape, and I will simply go to cell G2 where my GST rate is being written, and I want to actually name this cell. I want to rename this cell. It is currently referred by G2, which is of course the standard practice of naming it as a column and row, but I want to rename this cell to the GST rate. So the way I do that is I simply look at this cell over here in which the name of a cell appears, and if I click over here, this is the name box. If I click over here, this G2 is selected, and I will simply write GST underscore rate over here. You cannot have spacebar in your names, so that's why I use an underscore. So I will rename this to GST rate and I press enter. So now when I move out of this column, I see H2, but when I move back to this column, I see the name GST rate which I gave to it. And now what we can do is we can simply say that okay, I want to calculate GST on my product A. Let me do that by calculating E5, that is 1700, multiplied by GST rate. So you can see it is already giving me as an autofill over here, which is GST rate in the named range. I can simply press tab for it to be populated. So it is doing E5 into GST rate, which is 18%, and I press enter. I get the same answer 306, but let's say if it solves our earlier problem, that is if I autofill this formula for the 4 products, and you will see the answer is yes. I get 1800 times 18% and so on for all the 4 products, and I get my final GST amounts for all these 4 products. So your named range works similar to your frozen cell, wherein you can just copy and paste that formula into another cell. It will still refer to the same cell again, and I can then just calculate my final selling price by taking the initial selling price and add the GST over it, and I will just simply copy this across for the next three products as well. So that is a really fine way of being able to use named ranges to do our calculation. A side benefit of actually doing this is, let's say you were using this cost sheet for calculating the selling price. Now in the next GST meeting, it is decided that we need to drop the rate on this particular product from 18% to 12%. That is, initially the GST on this product was 18% and now it has been reduced to 12%. So I need to again calculate everything to be able to get my final selling price. I can simply do that by changing the number in G2 from 18% to 12%. And when I do that, what I think is going to happen is all these numbers in column F, that is the GST numbers, they will all get recalculated based on 12% now, and similarly my final selling price will change based on the new GST. Let's see, and voila, you actually get that right. That is, you get the new GST numbers based on the new GST rate and your final selling price accordingly. So that's how powerful Excel is, and that's how you can make the most out of it by using tips such as named ranges and frozen cells. Yes, so maybe now it's a good time where we go ahead and look at a question from IFOA. So that is your question 1 from IFOA. I have it opened in a PDF over here. So let's look at what this question is about. It says that the question spreadsheet contains data on the euro pound exchange rate, that is how much 1 euro is worth in terms of pound sterling, for every day in 2016. Okay, a descriptive data analysis, which is your first chapter name, data analysis, is carried out in order to summarize the key features of the data set. So you are required to first of all determine highest value, lowest value and average value of the euro pound rate for 2016. So with what we have learned, we should be able to do part 1 of this question. We will come back to part 2 and 3 in some time, but let's try part 1 of this question. So if you look at the question spreadsheet that has been given to you, you will see that IFO has provided a data like this, wherein there is a date column and a euro pound exchange rate column. And if you just simply have a look at those rates, they start from 1st January, and if you want to go all the way to the last date, you can either scroll down using your arrow or using your mouse cursor, or I can give you a very nice shortcut right now. Is if you press Control plus down arrow or Command plus down arrow in a Mac, you will directly go to the last row in this particular section. If I press Command and down arrow, you can see directly I dropped all the way down to 31st December 2016, and there is no data below that. So all these shortcuts I will keep on telling in between. I will create a small sheet of all these shortcuts as well, so that you have them to refer. But while I do say all these things, I hope you guys also keep trying all these things as and when, so that you will get a better idea of Excel. Yes, so coming back to this question at hand, I see that from 1st Jan till 31st December, I have the date column and I have a corresponding exchange rate for each of the day, which is what the question said I would have. Just to double check how many data cells do I actually have, what I can do is I can select this entire date range from 1st Jan till 31st December. So similarly, the way I came down, I can go back up as well by simply pressing Control plus up arrow or Command plus up arrow, and I land on the date cell. Now I want to understand how many cells or how many data points do I have. So for that, what I can do is I can start from this cell A4 where my first date is and press shift plus down arrow to select the entire date range. So for selecting the entire date range, I will have to press shift plus down arrow all the way till that row 369. Or instead of doing that, which will be of course tedious as I said, I have another shortcut for you. That is, you can simply press shift control and down arrow or shift command and down arrow to make the entire range selection for you. That is, it will select all the cells from your starting till the point where you have no data left for you, and this entire range gets selected. We will actually make more use of this particular trick in a little while, but for now I wanted to just understand how many data points do I have. And you can actually come and look at this bottom right corner over here. That is, the count is 366, which should be expected because the year is 2016, which is a leap year. So I should have 366 data points in that particular year for exchange rates, which I do have. So everything well and good so far. Now let's go to solve this question. So the first thing they want us to have is the highest value of the euro pound exchange rate during 2016 and the date on which this occurred. So I will first go ahead with calculating the highest value or getting the highest value, and the way I do that is I'll just first write highest value. I also want the lowest value, so I'll write that down, and the average value. Okay, so now I want to calculate the highest value, and you can simply again use an inbuilt Excel function to do this, and let's introduce ourselves to another function which is called as the max function. So the max function is just as intuitive. It is the maximum function, that is in the range that you select for this, whatever is the maximum value, it will give that out as the answer. So I will press max, I will press tab, and then I want to select this entire exchange rate range from this B4 till all the way down. So we just learned a trick to do that, which is if I press shift control and down arrow, shift plus control and down arrow, or shift plus command and down arrow in Mac, you see that the entire range from B4 to B369 is selected, and I will simply close this bracket and press enter. So when I do that, I get the answer is 0.9035, which is the highest value or the maximum exchange rate in the year 2016. If you do not trust this answer, you can actually go ahead and check this out yourself, which I believe will be very, very difficult because you have 366 different numbers. So let's go back to trusting Excel to do this for us. Now I want to also calculate the lowest value. I will simply use a similar function, which is the minimum function or the min function. So max function for the highest value or the maximum value, and min function for the lowest value or the minimum value. So now I can just simply press tab and again select the same range. But instead of doing this, I feel that I'll just press escape and come out of this formula. I feel that this is a range, that is B4 to B369 is a range which I have to use again and again in my formulas. I had to use it for the highest value, I have to do it for lowest value as well, and I will have to do it for average value as well. So when you know that there is a particular range that you may have to use again and again, another way you can actually get to that range is by selecting that range and changing its name. So we already used a named cell when we were calculating GST. We can actually do the same thing for a range as well. So for the range B4 to B369, what I do is I select this entire range and I go to this name box and I call this, let's say, exchange rates. So exch underscore rates, and I press enter. Now I'll just go back up, and now if I want to refer back to this range, I don't have to go and manually select this. All I can do is in my formula itself, I will write is equal to max tab and write exch exchange rates, and you can see this entire range is automatically selected for us. And I will close my bracket and press enter. I have the same answer. I do the same thing for getting the lowest value, which is by using the min function and by using the exchange rates range. Similarly, I do the same thing for calculating the average value by using the average function and typing that range name. Enter. You may see that there are different decimal points for each of these. So if I want to have a standard 4 decimal point for all of them, what I can do is I can select these 3 numbers and use my number formatting. So I want to decrease decimal to 4 places for each of these answers, and I get my final answer. Another thing you may have noticed here is that these 2 values are towards the right end of their cells, whereas the average value is at the center. Now this may not be important from exam point of view. However, if you are going to use Excel in the long term, which you will be definitely, you should be bit peculiar about the formatting as well. So the way to actually get this to the right end of things is by using this alignment. So right now this alignment, which is using center text, I want to align this to the right, and if I press this, you can see this 0.8193 has shifted all the way to the right as well. Yes, now if I simply go back to the question and look at what they were asking, so I see that they asked us the highest, lowest and average value which we calculated, but they also asked us to calculate the date on which this has occurred. So they don't only want the exchange rate itself, but they also want the date on which that particular rate had occurred. So we can do that by introducing ourselves to another formula, that is the if function. So let's understand what that is by using a new book. Yes, so if I want to understand the if formula, let's take a particular example. Let's say there are simply 2 numbers, number 1, number 2, and let's say the number 1 is 50, number 2 is 44. Now I want to check whether number 1 is greater than number 2 or not. If that is the case, then I want to say that okay, A is winning, or if it is the other way around, then I will say, let's say B is winning. So maybe this number 1 and number 2 are scores for A and B. So these are scores for A and B, and whoever has the higher score will win. So whatever the result or whatever the outcome is, I want to print that in this cell G3. So the way I will do this by using an Excel function is by using something known as the if function, which is one of the most used functions in Excel. So how I use it is, let's say I start with pressing the is equal to sign as always, and I use the function name, that is if. I press tab, and if you just quickly read what is asked of us over here. So the first thing is asked is a logical test. Then they want us to provide what is the value if this test is true, and then they want us to tell what is the value you need to show if this test is false. So my logical test is to find out whether A outscored B or not, that is whether A's score was higher than B or not. So for that I will select the cell C5 where A's score is written, and I want to check whether this is greater than B score. So I will use the greater than sign, that is if C5 or A score is greater than D5, which is B score. So if C phi is greater than D phi, that is my logical test. If that is true, then what? So for that I have to press comma. Once you press comma, your first input or your first argument is over, which was the logical test itself, which in our case is C phi greater than D phi. Now if that is true, then what do I want the result to be? And I want it to say that A has 1. So whenever I want to insert text inside a formula, I have to use something known as your double colons. So I will start with this double colon and I will say A has 1, and I will finish my sentence with another double colon. So far what we have is a logical test if C phi is greater than D phi, comma, okay, what if this is true? We will say A has 1, and to say that we have to use double quotes. And I will press comma again, and there is another argument, which is what if this is false? What if C phi is not greater than D phi? Then I want it to be said that okay, B has 1. So I will again use double colon and say B has 1, and I will end with double colon, and that is the end of my formula. I provided a logical test, I provided a value in case this is true, and I have provided a value in case this is false, and I will end my bracket. So once I press enter, let's think about what it should actually display. Maybe take a moment and think what will be the answer when I press enter. So yes, if you thought the answer has to be A has 1, that is absolutely correct, and it does so because simply your A's score is greater than B score. Let's see what happens if we change these numbers. So A score maybe has dropped from 50 to 40. Let's see what happens when I press enter. It simply says B has 1 because Excel is continuously reading this formula and it is continuously checking that okay, if C phi is greater than D phi, then I have to display A as 1. If that is not the case, then I have to display B as 1, which is what happens in the second case. So this is how your standard if function works, and we will use this many times in many different ways across our course so that you get a much better understanding of this if function. Yes, so as we can see, we are asked that, coming back to this question, we are asked what was the date on which the maximum value had occurred and what was the date on which the minimum value had occurred. So let's go back to this question. Now, although I did calculate the highest, lowest and average over here, what I would like you guys to always keep in mind is whenever data is given, don't start solving in that worksheet itself, rather use the copy option that we had studied. So what I'll do is I'll copy this entire data, that is this entire worksheet, by using the move or copy, and I want to move this to the end and create a copy. So when I press OK, I can see exchange rate data 2 is created, and I want to rename this sheet because this should not be called exchange rate data 2, rather I will have my answer to the question 1 in this sheet. So what I'll rename this to is, I'll double click and I'll say ANS, that is answer 1. So if you see, we have 3 questions over here, 1, 2 and 3. For now we are focusing on 1. So I want the answer 1 in this particular worksheet. And just for now we can also create more copies for our answer 2 and answer 3. So by creating, click copy, and I'll create simply a copy of this as well for now. Move to end, create a copy, and I'll just rename these worksheets to answer 2 and answer 3 so that we have our answer structure ready. So let's come back to the matter at hand, which is answer to the question 1. Yes, so I have calculated the 4 highest, lowest and average again like we did before. Now I want to know which date does this occur on. So for this we will use our if function knowledge. So let's simply understand what we need here. If this exchange rate had occurred on 1st Jan itself, if the maximum exchange range had occurred on 1st Jan itself, then I will want my result to be the date, that is 1st Jan itself. So if I want to create a formula for this, what I'll say is equal to if this particular rate, that is 0.7375, if this is equal to, so we did our logical test initially on greater than, we can similarly do this on lower than and equal to as well. So for equal to, I simply have to say if this B4 is equal to my maximum value over here, then in that case, if it is actually the case, then I want this particular cell C3 to show me the date on which this has occurred. If that is not the case, that is if 1st Jan was not the date when the exchange rate was maximum, then I want this to simply show me a blank cell. And if I want to see a blank cell, all I have to do is I have to press double colons twice. Double colons twice means that there is no text in between, which means simply a blank cell. And then I will close my bracket and I press enter. So you can see there is no output to be displayed over here, simply because I have said that I don't want anything to be displayed unless my condition gets met. Now all I have to do is I have to copy this across the entire 366 dates, and whichever date for which this condition will be true will be the date of my maximum value. So firstly, in that I know that if I copy and paste this formula, or if I drag this formula across using autofill, this H3 is not frozen, which means that this H3 will also keep on dragging. So firstly I want to freeze this H3, and we had learned two ways to do this. One was using our F4, that is the dollar sign, and the other was using a named range. So for now I will actually use a named range for this. That is, I'll go to this H3 and I will call this as the max underscore value. I'll do the same thing for H4, that is a minimum value, by calling it the min underscore value, and this average by calling it the AVG underscore value, that is the average value. Although I only need the maximum and minimum value in this case. So I go back to this formula and I just simply change this one thing, that is whenever B4 is equal to my max underscore value tab, then I want the date to be displayed, or else I don't want anything to be displayed, and I press enter. Now all I have to do is I have to copy this formula across till the last cell. So before that I'll just give this column a header, that is when max value question mark, and I will autofill. So all I have to do is I have to drag this formula to the last range, or if you remember I had given a shortcut to this, is because in the adjoining column, that is column B, there is data till 369, I can simply double click over here, and when I double click, this formula gets copied till the very last cell in this particular column, which is still here, and you can see at C369 you can see this formula is there in the formula window. Okay, so we have our formula, and if we scroll down we may be able to find one date where we can see the exchange rate is maximum on, but I don't want to do this manually. I want to actually check using Excel itself which date this formula had occurred on. So let's think about it. We have some cells wherein there is no value, it is a blank value, and there will be in between one cell where you will have this date value. So let's try what we want to check over here. Let's say there is one cell with the date 1st January 2020, and there is a cell which has nothing in it, so it is just a blank cell, which is H11. Now if I take a maximum of these two cells, that is H10 and H11, which is a date cell and a blank cell, if I take the maximum of these two, I get 1 Jan 2020. So what Excel does is it takes blank cells as null, that is as 0, and anything apart from that, such as a date over here, will be considered as the maximum value compared to the blank cell. So we will apply this same logic. I'll delete these cells for now, and we will apply the same logic to find our maximum date, that is the maximum exchange rate date. And what I'll do is I'll simply say, okay, take the maximum of these cells, the date cells that is, and I close my bracket and I press enter. So I get this number 42,675, and you may be very confused as to why am I getting this number and not a date as expected. So the reason is simply because the format over here is taking a number itself. If I want to convert this to date, all I can do is simply go to this formatting over here, the number format, press the down arrow and select short date. When I do that, it converts that number to a date. So whenever you face this issue in Excel where you see a number where you were expecting a date, it is very likely it has something to do with the formatting. So just simply go and change the formatting over here. And over here now you can see that we have the maximum date as 1 November 2016. And to confirm, we can actually just go all the way down and maybe come to 1 November 2016. And you can see over here that 0.9035 was the exchange rate on that date, and that date was indeed the date at which the highest exchange rate was traded. So we get our answer to part 1A, that is the highest value was 0.9035 and it had occurred on the maximum date, that is on this particular date. I want you all to pause this video, try this out on yourself, by yourself, and understand what is happening in these formulas. You may make mistakes, but I want you to get through it. Maybe just copy what I did and evaluate those formulas so that you will understand how did we actually got this particular answer. And once you do that, I also want you guys to actually try and calculate the minimum date yourself once. So although I will calculate it now, I want you to pause and first try and calculate the minimum value yourself. Yes, hoping you guys did attempt this minimum value. I'll do this myself as well. That is when the minimum value had occurred, and I'll adjust the width. I'll use the formula that is equal to if tab this particular rate is my minimum value, then I want the date to be displayed, or else I want blank to be displayed. So if you got this formula right, kudos to you, well done, you have probably understood this logic. And I press enter, and I want to just copy this across the entire range. So all I have to do is double click, and it appears that our minimum value was much sooner than expected, that is it has to be on 5th Jan, and we can just simply confirm that by checking for the minimum date. It is possible that some of you may have made a mistake by calculating the minimum over here, and you would be wrong for that, because we want to understand which date appeared in this particular column D, and for us to be able to identify that, we always have to use the maximum function, not the minimum function. When we use the minimum function, Excel will look at these blank cells, take them as 0 and give us the minimum date as 0, which is not our answer. So we want still the maximum value from this range of cells. And when I press enter, I get this number, which we know how to change back to a date now. And you can see it is 5th Jan indeed, that is on 5th Jan the exchange rate for a euro pound was the lowest. So that takes care of our question 1 from the question 1 part 1 from IFOA. Yes, so with that we are finally able to complete our part 1 of the IFOA question, which is your highest value, lowest value and average value along with the dates on which these occurred. So again, I strongly suggest that you did try this with me, and if not, then probably just try once now and understand if you if you're able to get these answers or not. That is your maximum date, minimum date and everything. Okay, so let's move forward and get done with this question. So the second part of the question asks us to plot a graph showing the pound euro pound exchange rate during 2016, including a line corresponding to the average exchange rate. So it's basically asking us to plot a graph. So before jumping on to the answer, let's first learn how do we actually create a graph in Excel. So I'll go back to my earlier example on student A's marks, and what I want to do is I just simply want to plot the marks of student A on a graph. So how do we do that? It's very simple actually. What you do is simply select the series or the numbers which you want to plot on the graph, and you simply go to the insert tab on your ribbon. So the very next tab to home, you go over there, and if you look somewhere in the middle, you will see charts. So there are a lot of options over here. You will see column charts, line charts and everything. What I suggest you is click on recommended charts always, and Excel directly recommends you some charts over here. So let's say I want to actually create a normal column chart because I want to compare marks of different subjects. So I simply click on that chart and you will see the chart appears. Okay, so you can just simply reposition this, you can resize this by coming to the corners and everything. So that's good. Now if you look at this chart, this is just the blank chart of the numbers. These are your numbers and these are the marks that have been obtained. But apart from that, this is a completely blank slate. So firstly I want to understand what this chart is speaking to me. For that I will have to change the chart title. So over here you will see there is a default chart title written. If I click over it, that range is selected and the cursor appears that I can edit it. If I click again, then I can edit this chart title. So for now I want to change this to student A marks, and I press somewhere else and the title has been changed. Another thing that I would like to change in this chart is this region over here, that is the horizontal axis or your x-axis labels. So right now by default they are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I would rather have the name of the subjects for which these marks have been obtained over here. So what I can do for that is I can click on this graph and right click. When I right click, there are multiple options. I want to select data. So when I say select data, this window opens in which your chart range, that is the range that you've selected, appears, and there are some other options as well. Now for now what I want to do is I want to change the horizontal axis labels. So there is an option over here to do that, and you can basically click on this button over here. So now you can select the range with which you want to actually populate your horizontal axis, and as I said, I want to actually have the subject names over there. So what I do is I simply select those subject names, that is the 6 cells in column B, and I press enter. So now you can see under horizontal axis labels that student A, B6 to B11 is where my range of axis labels is, and I can simply press OK. And you will see in the chart that the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 has been substituted by the names themselves. Additionally, if I want to have, let's say, a horizontal axis title or a vertical axis title, the ways to do that is you simply select the chart and there will be always a chart design tab appearing on the ribbon. Over here, if you go to the left side, there is an add chart element, and I can simply add axis title. Let's say I want to add the horizontal axis title. So you will see this axis title box appear over here. Again, I will edit this, and these are your subjects. So I will write subjects over here. Similarly, I want to add the vertical axis title. I go back to axis titles and select vertical axis, and over here this by default comes in a slant position and you want to keep it that way. So if I just select it normally, and I can write marks out of 100 over here. So this is now more informative as a chart, wherein I see the subjects for which marks have been obtained. These are student A's marks as per the title, and the vertical axis tells me that okay, these are marks out of 100 or whatever he has obtained. If I want to simply again reposition, resize this, I can do this. If I want to move this vertical axis title a little away from the chart itself, I can just do that as well. And from formatting perspective, you can actually do a lot of changes as well. You can simply change chart designs, you can use some other different types of formatting, and I leave these things up to you. I hope you guys are trying this with me, and as you do, maybe do try a couple of options in chart design and format and just see what happens so that you're aware. And this will really help you in just understanding how charts function. Although formatting will not be asked directly anywhere in the questions, however, it is suggested that you actually do get yourself familiarized with it. So let's go back to the question that we had, which is plot a graph for the Euro Pound exchange rate during 2016, including a line for the average exchange rate. So if I just go back to the solution, so this is answer 2, and in simple terms what they want is they want a line graph of this entire range. Again, I selected this entire range using shift control down arrow. So I select this range, I press insert recommended charts, and the first chart is the line chart. So I simply select that, and you should see the line chart appear over here. Now by default, since I was at row 369 at this point, the chart appeared at row 340 or something. You would want to actually move this all the way to the top of your Excel. So for that, what I'll do is I will simply cut this chart over here, which is use Control plus X, and you'll see the chart is cut over there, and I'll scroll all the way up to, let's say, row 4, and I will paste it again. So Control plus V. So that is one way which another way in which you can reposition your chart. Now again, I will do similar things over here. So this is my blank chart. I first want to rename this chart, and I want to give it the pound euro exchange rate. So instead of me searching for the symbols, what I'll do is I'll go to this cell B3 and I'll copy the text inside it. So to copy the text inside it, I'll simply click on the formula, or rather the cell directly, and I will select this entire range and press Ctrl C. So that instead of copying the cell, it copies the text inside it, and I just want to paste that text inside my chart title. So I will again select this and paste. So my chart title has been changed from chart title to pound exchange, euro pound exchange rate. That's good. Now I again want to change this horizontal x-axis label from this 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers to probably the date over here. So if you want, you can try this yourself before I do, and whenever I say try this yourself, maybe you could just pause this video, do it, come back and check if you did right. Okay, so what we wanted here is we wanted to simply change this. I'll go to select data, I'll go to horizontal x-axis label to this selection, and I want to select the entire date range. So I'll start from 1 Jan, shift control down arrow, and I select the entire range. I press enter and OK. So if I'm at row 350, if I scroll all the way up, my chart should appear now, and yes, you can see that the x-axis labels have been transformed to dates. And not only that, if you notice, it only shows the monthly dates, that is 1st Jan, 1st Feb, 1st March, etc. This is because Excel automatically adjusts based on the size of my chart, and Excel understands that since these dates will be too big to show, they cannot show all the 366 dates. In fact, they only show the relevant time interval dates, which is monthly dates in our column. So again, another powerful application of Excel. Now if I just read the question correctly, I understand that they also want a line corresponding to the average exchange rate. So this is the line chart for the movement of the exchange rate, and they also want a line for the average exchange rate that was there throughout the year. Now we did calculate the average in answer 1, which was 0.8193. If I want to bring that exchange rate in my chart over here, the way I can do that is I can add another column called average rate over here, and I will populate this column using the average value. So if you remember, we had given it a name average value, and if I press enter, this is the average exchange rate throughout the year. But this has only been added for 1st Jan, and I want this in my chart throughout from 1st Jan till 31st December. So for that, what I'll do is I'll simply auto populate this for the entire range. So I basically added another series or another column completely filled with the average rate throughout the year. And now I want to add this column, or I want to add this average rate series in my chart. The way I do this is by again selecting this chart. There is already data selected for exchange rate, and there is already some data selected for the dates. I want to add more data for the average rate. The way I do this is I'll right click and go to select data again, and you will see there is already a series 1 over here which is populated by the average exchange rate. What I'll do is I'll add another series by using this plus sign, series 2, and for the values over here I'll go to this Y values and click on this button, and I will select the average range series. So starting from C4, using shift control down arrow, I will select the entire column, press enter and OK. So if I scroll back up to my chart area, you will see that there is a straight line in orange appearing on top of my chart of exchange rate, which is showing that average rate throughout the year. So from question point, we are actually done with this part. However, if you see this chart by itself, there is a lot of room for improvement, so we will go for it. Firstly, you will see there is a lot of space that is being wasted over here. That is from 0 till 0.7. There is actually no value because we already know the minimum was 0.7 something. So we can actually remove this 0 to 0.6 space or 0 to 0.7 space if you want. And the way we will do that is we will click on the chart again, right click and press on format axis. So I will click on this axis on this Y axis again, and over here you should see multiple options opening at the right side. So there will be axis options, text options, and then if you just hover over this, you will see fill and line, effects, size and properties, axis options. So for now what we want to do will be done in axis options. If you click on axis options, you will see there are 4 options over here as well, which is axis options, tick marks, labels, number. So what we want to do is we want to remove this space from 0 to 0.7 such that our y-axis starts from 0.7 itself. So what I'll do is I'll go to this axis options, and you will see a region called as bounds. So bounds is basically the boundary or the limit on which you want to show your y-axis. So if you see over here, the minimum is 0, which you can confirm over here, and the maximum is 1, which you can confirm over here. I want to change this minimum from 0 to 0.7. And when I press enter, you will see Excel has automatically readjusted the chart from 0.7 to 0.95. It has changed the maximum value as well, and now this is a much more informative chart because there is lot less wastage than there was before. So if we want to make some more adjustments, I see that over here my y-axis labels have 4 decimal places, and honestly I can do with 2 decimals as well, because anyway these are appearing in units of 0.05. So in order to change that, what I can do is I can go to the number column over here, and you will see an option called decimal places. So if I just change that from 4 to 2 and press enter, you will see that that change has been made. Apart from this, I always suggest everyone add x-axis and y-axis titles. We just learned how to do that, so I'll quickly do that by going to chart design, add chart element, x-axis title. So horizontal, this should be the dates, and similarly I just select on add chart element for the y-axis title, which should be the exchange rate. And that is it. You are actually done with plotting this chart. And just some additional information on top of that is this actually shows you how powerful visual representation of data is. If you would have looked at these exchange rates and the average rate, you would not have been able to decipher much. But now when you see this chart over here, you see that there is a very clear trend in this in the euro pound exchange rate. That is, for the first half of the year till around 1st July, the exchange rate was trading at a lower than average value. So the exchange rate of euro pound was lower than average for first half of the year, and in the second half of the year, that is after July, it started trading above the average rate. So this just, if somebody wants to do descriptive analysis or data analysis on this, if they simply visualize these two numbers or these two charts next to each other, they can understand that there must have been something that had happened in July which kicked the exchange rate of euro pound from below average to above average, and then you can go and analyze or scrutinize it more. But that's not part of our question. That is just some additional information I wanted to give you. Yes, so we are done with part 2 of this question, and if I just go back to the last part of the question, it says calculate the number of days during 2016 for which exchange rate is in the following ranges, and they've given us ranges from 0.7 to 0.7499 all the way till 0.9 to 0.9499. Okay, pretty interesting, but we can do this. So I'll go to answer 3, and what it asks is, let's take the first part, which is 0.7 to 0.7499, and I want to know the number of days, the total number of days on which this happened. So we already know how to use the if condition. Let's see how we can use it over here. First, I want to know whether this particular exchange rate, is it between 0.7000 till 0.7499. So this is my first criteria. What I can do is, if this criteria is fulfilled for this 1st January, I want to display my result, that is value of true, as 1, the number 1. And in case it does not get fulfilled, then I want to simply display 0. So we'll get to that in some time. First, you want to understand that why or how do I put this equation or this logical test across. One is, I want that this particular number is greater than or equal to. So the way you add greater than or equal to is by adding the greater than and equal to sign next to each other in Excel. This is greater than or equal to 0.7. In this case, we already know that is going to be true. So if I just press enter, you will see that the logical test gives me an answer true. Another thing I want to test is whether this is lower than 0.7499, and I want to test both these logical tests together. So the way I do that is, I use something known as the AND function, A and D AND function. So what AND function does is, it combines multiple logical tests inside. So what I'll do, I'll show you for this particular one, that I want to give one logical test over here, which is whether this number is greater than and equal to 0.7, and I add comma. This was my first logical test, and I will add another logical test, which is whether this number is less than equal to 0.7499. Because the range is 0.7 to 0.7499, my second test is whether this same number is less than or equal to 0.7499, and I will close the bracket. Now let's think about this. This particular number, which is 0.7375, is it greater than 0.7? We already know that is true, then yes. The other test that I fed is whether this number 0.7375 is less than 7.7499, and the answer is also yes, which means that both these tests should give a value of true. And if you are at all familiar with logical reasoning, when you have two logical tests which are true, then your AND operator will also give you a true answer. So since both of these are true, you will get your final answer as true, and when I press enter, you will see that that is the case, and my logical test gives an answer of true. Even if either of these conditions were not being met, that is, let's say it was a number that was greater than 0.7 but not less than 0.7499, I can try this test over here for this particular number, that is, and this number greater than equal to 0.7 and the same number less than equal to 0.7499. Now this number I already know is greater than 0.7 but not less than 0.7499, which means one of the tests is true and the other is false. So if you have one true and one false, your answer will also be a false. So when I press enter, you will see there is a false. So for the AND operator or for the AND function, if you wanted true output, both your test or all your tests that you give in have to be true. Even if either of them are false or all of them are false, then your final answer will be false. Okay. So using that logic, we can build our if function. I understand you may have some confusions about this over here. So I'll suggest you try a couple of tests on your own and understand how this AND operator works overall. Also, this is not the only way to solve this question. There are other ways in which we can do this, but I felt this is the right time to introduce you guys to the AND function. So I'll combine the if and AND function over here to get my final answer. So the function would be something like this, that is the if function. So my operation will be like this: if, and I want to give a combination of two tests, so I'll use the AND function over here. So this is another thing you can do in Excel multiple times, that is, you can use a function inside another function without any hesitation. So what I want is if and this particular number is greater than equal to 0.7, comma, this same number is less than equal to 0.7499, bracket close. So my logical test is completed, which is with the help of the AND function. I'm saying that both these tests should be true. Only then my logical test in the if function will give a true output. If that is the case, comma, as I said, if that is true, I want this to display as 1, and if that is not true, then I want to display this as 0, and I close my bracket. So this becomes my final function, which I will use to check whether this particular number or this particular rate is between the above range 0.7 and 0.7499, and I press enter, and you will see that over here the answer is 1. Let's take a moment to understand why this is happening. So first thing the if function wants is a logical test, and there are only two options to a logical test: either it is true or it is false. We already know using AND before that this particular logical test is true for your first value, which is 0.7375. So that's why this if function gave a true output. So then Excel went to check, okay, what is the value if this is true, and that value was 1. That's why we got our answer over here as 1. Now why did I choose 1 and 0 as my value if true and value if false options? What the question asks us is, it wants to know the number of days, the total number of days in which this particular criteria was met. So since this was met on this particular date, that is on 1st Jan, I want to count this day in this particular column. So I want to count this day in my C column as 1. If it was not being met, then I don't want to count that date, and at that point I wanted to display it as a 0. So if I just autofill this function for the entire column by double clicking over here, you will see there are some ones, there are some zeros. Now all I want to know is what was the total number of days on which this criteria was met. So what I can do is I can just create a small table over here, that is 0.7 to 0.7499. This is the range, and I want to know the total number of days. So the total days on which this was true. All I have to do now is take the sum, SUM tab, and I want to take the sum of this particular range. Shift control down arrow, selects the entire range, bracket close, enter, and I get my answer as 8, which is the number of days on which this particular criteria was met. If you understood this, then I want you guys to first try on your own 0.75 to 0.7999, 0.8 to 0.8499, 0.85 to 0.8999, and 0.9 to 0.9499. So I want to try these four, I want you to try these 4 columns on your own and get the total number of days for all of this. Yes, so hopefully you guys tried and checked your answers for this. So over here this will be 0.75 and 0.799. The function, the rest of the function should be exactly the same. This will be 0.8 and 0.8499, 0.85 and 0.8999, and 0.9 and 0.9499. I can just auto populate this for the entire ranges, and then I'll just use the same ranges over here, just 0.7999, 0.8 to 0.8499, 0.85 to 0.8999, and finally 0.9 to 0.9499. And I want to calculate the sum of the days. So if I just do this, sum of this particular range, enter, sum of this third column, sum of this fourth column, that is F column, and finally sum of this G column. So when I do that, I get the total number of days on which the exchange rate was trading between these particular ranges. And as a final confirmation test, what I can do is, since I know that the entire year exchange rate traded between 0.7 and 0.9499, ideally the sum of all these 5-day number of days should total up to 366. So we can just quickly check that by taking a sum over here of these 5 numbers, and when I see, so that is 366, which means that our answer should be fine. This is something you can use for confirmation. Another thing you might have noticed is something relating to formatting, that is, we created these 5 columns, however there are no grid lines or no borders over here, and there are borders in the data. So if you simply want to add border to this region as well, all you have to do is select this region. Now there are multiple ways you can select this. You can do this using your mouse, or you can use your arrow keys like normal. What I prefer to do is I'll select all the columns that I want to select, and I press shift control down arrow. That selects the entire range for me. And now I want to add a border to this. So you can look in the home tab itself. You will find this small icon appearing with a down arrow. So that is your borders, and I want to have all borders over this. So you will see that this entire region is now populated with borders. Again, this is from formatting side. You may not need formatting in the exam, but it is suggested that you do stick to some decent side of formatting. So that takes care of your question 1 of IFOA, and in essence your chapter 1 of the IFOA. Thank you so much everyone for listening to this lecture, and I hope this was helpful and this was sort of a good start for your Excel journey in CM1. We have a lot to learn, we have a lot new things to try out, and I hope you are as excited as I am to finish off this course. and finish off the CM1 on a really good note. So yes, please keep practicing. Do try these questions on your own. Do try some of these functions that I keep telling you, so that you will get more hands-on with it. And see you in the next lecture. Bye bye.